match our supplies. But that requires adaptivity and flexibility of supply, demand, resources, labor, and flexibility of the prices to reflect the truth of the real market conditions now in the post-boom era. Instead, what did the federal government do in the United States? And in various ways this was followed in Europe as well. The United States government panicked. Okay? They panicked. Oh, financial institutions may go under. Oh, certain sectors of the economy, like the auto industry in Michigan, it's too important. They're too big to fail. We have to come in and subsidize them. Give them money to sustain them. In other words, you're trying to keep afloat situations that are unsustainable in this post-boom period. What did the federal government do in the American financial markets? They strong-armed many of those banks to take federal money. A little over a year ago, in October 2008, the leading executives of the American financial institutions like Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and others, they were all informed that they were expected to come to Washington, D.C. and be there on a certain day at a certain time of the day, and to be at the Department of the Treasury for a meeting with the then Secretary of the Treasury, Hank Paulson, at 4 p.m. They show up. And what do they then have? An hour lecture by the Secretary of the Treasury, Paulson, and the head of the Federal Reserve, then and now, Ben Bernanke. And they're lectured on how serious the economic crisis is. The financial markets are facing a destabilizing situation. And the government has to come in and to shore them up, to give them tens of billions of dollars of infusions of cash. And the U.S. government is going to take their stock as collateral against this. Now, according to an article that was in the Washington Post about a week later, as information about the meeting dribbled out, because it was a secret meeting, no reporters, it turns out that several bank executives, including the head of Wells Fargo Bank, got up and said, we think we can weather this storm without federal assistance. Yes, it's serious. We're going to have to watch how we manage our investments and our portfolios and see how we can shore up our own cash positions. But we think we can weather this storm without federal intrusion or involvement or money. According to that article, based upon several of the CEOs talking about it and reported in the Washington Post, the Secretary of the Treasury, Paulson, said, none of you are leaving this building until you sign these documents. And what were these documents? They, as the executives of these banks, were approving and accepting federal money in exchange for bank stock under basically duress. They were being forced to accept government as a partner in their enterprise. And under that threat that they would not be allowed to leave the building until those documents had been respectively signed, they were signed, and then the bank executives left by 6 o'clock. Now, under all law in our societies, if someone puts a gun to your head and says, you're going to sell me 50% of the shares in your company under the threat of obviously, being shot or physically harmed, no court in your country or in my country would uphold such a forced transfer of ownership. I mean, law doesn't recognize, in principle, duress. But that, in fact, is what the federal government in the United States did in taking over partial nationalized ownership of some of the leading financial institutions of the United States. And then they started to proceed to bail out General Motors, Chrysler, giving the stocks to the leading trade unions, the American auto workers, and holding direct ownership of some of the shares. And we all know that he who pays the piper calls the tune. And now the U.S. government is doing what? It's saying that it will decide what kind of automobiles the citizens of the United States will have available in those showrooms. Now, it doesn't matter whether the customers for those automobiles would like that style, those features, that source of fuel. The government of the United States has decided what the American people should have available to them to drive. Now you might say, but that doesn't control all the automakers. Ford has stayed out of this. They chose not to take the government money. Good for them. And they've ended up being profitable. And it certainly federal money didn't go to Toyota or Honda or BMW or Volkswagen in the United States. But I would suggest that since the U.S. government has now decided what automobiles Americans will drive in the years ahead, if the American consumer goes into the automobile dealership showrooms and choose not to buy those automobiles, that the federal government will then, rather than see their investments go down the drain, will end up extending regulations forcing these other automobile companies to meet the same standards and sources of fuel and energy and styles and designs that they have mandated with their partial ownership of these companies. What else has the government done? And this is in Europe too. They've had all these stimulus programs. They have been spending hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars, and supposedly in the purpose of trying to save jobs, restore jobs, getting the economies going again. Do you know something? There are no government-created jobs. Jobs are created by individuals in the private sector saving a portion of the income they've earned and plowing it into an existing or a new enterprise in devising ways to make more or new or better products and hiring people to help that in the productive process. That is what creates jobs. Government has no money to put anyone to work other than what it takes either in taxes or borrowed money or newly created money. If the government taxes the citizens to try to create work or jobs in public works projects and other enterprises or subsidies of various sorts, every dollar the government spends in that way is $1 out of your pocket or my pocket. And therefore, for the dollar the government spends, we spend less. Where's the net effect? If the government borrows the money, for every dollar that the government borrows from the private financial markets, the very financial markets, they say they have to bail out. For every dollar that they borrow, that is one less dollar in the financial system for you or me to borrow as a private investor to start a business, to expand a business, to experiment with new technologies that may increase productivity down the road, or maybe a consumer loan to send your child